Welcome to the Boundaries and Beyond podcast with Jennifer, Dr. P, and Trinity. Today, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell button, and share this with all those people out there that you know that are boundaryless.
Yes. You gonna keep going?
Okay.
There's no recorded laughs here, so keep going.
Okay. So today is our second episode, but it's the first in our first 10 topics. This topic, we're going to take a deep dive into what boundaries are and what they're all about, how they relate to relationships. So I remember when I first learned about boundaries was over 16 years ago when Dr. P and I went into our first therapy session. Actually, I thought that I was kind of an expert because a girlfriend a couple of years prior had shared it's a great book, but I didn't remember a whole lot about it. And it was actually kind of over my head because I didn't have anyone to discuss it with at the time. But it's called Boundaries by Dr. Cloud and Townsend. And it is a great intro. And in fact, they have a wonderful series of everything from, talking to teenagers, boundaries with leaders, things like that. One of their best books that I really enjoyed was their workbook that I did with a bunch of girlfriends. And I would highly recommend doing that, not alone. I mean, if that's the only choice you have, that's fine. But I would highly recommend doing this with a group of people because you get to share with each other the creative and inspiring stories each week. If you're doing this on a weekly basis or monthly, you get to share with them how you've overcome different boundaries or different areas where you had to set boundaries or work up the courage to set boundaries and things of that nature. And it's really inspiring to do it that way. And that's a perfect complement to our podcast, too, by the way. So at any rate, well, his therapist mentioned that we'd be going over boundaries. And so, of course, me being an expert, I thought, oh, good. So he's basically going to give me permission to tell my husband what to do and how to do it. And, I couldn't have been more wrong. Boundaries is about sharing, or at least in a relationship, it's about sharing that responsibility to, if I set a boundary on you and you honor that, you set a boundary on me, I honor that as well. So it's more of a partnership. It's not a tell me how to boss people around kind of thing. So with that, honey, would you like to continue?
So one of the points you were making is how the boundary, we're going to talk about boundaries in general, just define them so that we understand them. But when we're practicing these boundaries, we're talking primarily about intimate relationships, how to deal with couples. And then we can, once you master this material, it's a lot easier to generalize it to parenting and coworkers and friends, etc. So you really, when you start this, it's really important that you do it with someone that's going to work with you. That's number one. Mm-hmm. And number two, you probably need some guidance. Mm-hmm. There are ways to do this. If you do the workbook that you mentioned, that's a good place to start. Ideally, you want to have another couple working with you. So essentially a group of 4 working this out. And then...
Or like I did with a Bible study group.
Right. So you use it kind of like a Bible study situation. So as we talk about this a little bit more, then we'll go into a few examples. And this is meant to just give you a general overview of boundaries, or at least to our listeners. And then in further episodes, we'll bring it in. We'll come in and out of talking about boundaries. Every episode, there will be some subject or some way we'll be addressing boundaries. That's why this is called Boundaries and Beyond, because this is the foundation of a healthy relationship. Let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start with the definition of boundaries. So what are the boundaries, and maybe what you said when you, by the way, I was thinking about your girlfriends gave you a self-help book, and that is a very boundaryless situation when I think that my friend needs a self-help book when they didn't ask, or I didn't ask if they really needed it, and I just give somebody a self-help book. We realized after we started all this recovery program and therapy, we realized that's actually very dysfunctional behavior to start distributing unsolicited self-help advice. So if you're not sure what that means, it'll become obvious as you go through our sessions. So
in other words, when I say share with all those people out there that are boundaryless, it's kind of a joke.
Yeah, that is exactly it.
Yeah.
So when you were looking through that book, do you recall that they defined boundaries?
Wow, that was a very long time ago, but I think that Townsend and Cloud look at this from an angle of being a Christian thing to do, because I think that there's a lot of dysfunctional Christian behavior, or even, whatever religion you are. I think that many of the bigger religions today kind of capitalize on the fact of volunteerism, getting people to do things for free. Not to say that religions are bad for that, but some people can sacrifice so much that there's nothing left to them. It reminds me of that children's story by Rich. Well, I won't badmouth the story, but basically there's a plant that continues to give until it's nothing left but a stump. And I always thought
that actually is going to be the topic of our next discussion, which is self-care.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to that, and we'll cover how boundaries address that.
Yeah.
But the issue with this is we got to start with a clear definition of what boundaries are.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to start with here.
And so basically what I was saying was that Townsend and Cloud look at it from the angle of it's okay to say no. And even Jesus said no. Even God sets limits. Obviously, the 10 Commandments are limits. They're boundaries. When Jesus went to the temple and started throwing the tables with the money changers' money on them, that he was very angry. It's okay to be angry when somebody's really violating your boundaries, and having that anger or sadness or shame, that's an alarm bell that should be going off, that something's wrong with my boundary system. And we'll get more into emotions surrounding boundaries later too.
Yeah, but that's a good point, that the 12 commandments are good. The 10 commandments are a good start for a boundary system. Mm-hmm. But let's start by defining the boundaries, what boundaries are. So, and I'm going to first read this verbatim, and then we'll talk about it. So, a boundary system is boundaries are a system of limit setting that protects a person from being a victim and contains a person so that he or she is not offensive to others. Mm-hmm. So essentially what that's saying is that we are developing a system that we're protecting ourselves from others, mm-hmm. and then we're protecting others from ourselves. So we contain ourselves and we protect ourselves from others. Mm-hmm. So that's a good way to just place the boundaries where they start. And then we can start expanding from there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's different settings. Is that the right way to put it? There's different types of boundaries. So you want to set what are called physical boundaries, so mm-hmm. essentially around your body, your property, etc. Mm-hmm. Boundaries around your thought processes or thinking. So essentially trying to control somebody's thoughts. Those are where the boundaries. There's boundary violations. And emotions, trying to control somebody else's emotions. How many of us try to control somebody else trying to keep somebody else from being angry? I hear that all the time. I don't want you to be angry with me, or I'm so upset that you're angry with me. That's when those boundaries begin to collapse. And then, of course, behavior, what you do and what you don't do. And that's mostly something that we have control over ourselves. So going back to what the boundary systems are and protecting and containment, I can only control my own boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. So I cannot control what you do, mm-hmm. but I can find ways to protect myself against what you do.
That one was really hard for me. I remember a great example was I took everything on. If somebody was upset around me, I thought it was my fault somehow. I remember years ago, my trainer, we trained together quite a bit, and it was a day that he wasn't talking too much, and he was kind of turning red in the face, and I thought, what'd I do to piss him off? And I found out months later his dog had died. It had nothing to do with me, nothing. Being a man, though, he was working, he was trying to, stay focused and all that, and he wasn't going to unload on me and make it unprofessional.
I think that's a good point, and something that is worth expanding a little bit more on is how the difference between men and women, because you mentioned he's a man.
Yeah.
And men, at least culturally, but I think there's some genetic evidence for that, or at least physiologic evidence, not necessarily genetic, but that we tend to internalize or shut down when we're upset. We don't like to expose or make ourselves seem vulnerable, mm-hmm. especially to strangers. While the women tend to thrive, and I've seen when women respond to other women in pain is very different than when men respond to other men who are in pain.
In general, yeah.
Yes, and these are generalities. Mm-hmm. So men are more likely to withdraw and deal with their pain. They want their space, is what we often refer to as, let me have my space. While women want to share mm-hmm. what's going on with them. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, to some point where I think women almost want that gathering around them. My dog died, and we experienced that at work. I don't know how many pets died at work. It was so sad. 1 year, right after COVID, it's like everybody's pets were dying, and the women just wanted everyone to gather around. It was healing for us, but when our Shelby passed away, you and I were we were the owners, the leaders. That wouldn't be appropriate to ask them to caretake us. But I just noticed that it was like months and months later when one of the girls that used to babysit our dogs found out, and she just felt so sad that she didn't know, and we're like, well, we didn't want to bring y'all down.
Well, and there's some things that are appropriate for work and some things are not. Mm-hmm. And when you're the boss, you're not exactly going to work to get, you mentioned caretaking, which is essentially treat your coworkers or your employees as your therapist. Yeah. Although there is some benefit in communal grieving, that's not the place to do it.
Yeah. Well, some studies are showing that differently in the business world. Now, whether or not that this is a new transformative way that people relate to each other at work, I don't know if this is just a trend or if we're changing culturally. I guess only time will tell.
Yeah, because, for example, if somebody's on the clock, that's not exactly, they're not going to be getting paid for that. And I see that from a business owner standpoint. Yeah. But after work, we do mm-hmm. provide, or a lot of employers do provide bonding experiences or bonding opportunities to their employees, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay, so let's get off work because this was sort of a tangent.
Topic, yeah.
This is a completely different topic. So, having talked about body, thinking, feeling, and behavioral boundaries, mm-hmm. Then we're going to talk about the external system first, which is essentially, I have the right to control how close you get to me physically, and whether or not you get to touch me or my personal property.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the definition of the external physical boundary, protected boundary. Mm-hmm. So that is what we call an affirmative statement. So we affirm that boundary that way. And the containment, in other words, I need to protect you from me, is when someone is approaching me, my personal space, when I'm approaching somebody else's personal space, I need to respect what that boundary is, and sometimes it needs to be communicated because our boundaries may be very different. And we've worked our physical boundary, you and I, and mine is a lot bigger than yours. You practically want to be touching all the time, and I need my space. So but I have to recognize that that's not okay for me to be doing all the time, because we, as a couple, we need to be sharing our space. So that is our physical space.
Now, what
property.
about, that's an interesting topic, because at some point we're going to talk about who has the bigger boundary.
Yes, and that is something that's going to come up. Who has the bigger boundary? In other words, I have a bigger physical boundary. So she needs to be more respectful of that, because mine is just bigger.
That's why I have a dog.
That's why she has an emotional support animal. So we have the difference in boundaries, but those boundaries are not static, so they will shift. But when I really need my space, you respect it. And then there are times where you do feel like you need your space, and you let me know. I need my space right now. And we have code words too, because sometimes when we're very upset, we can't verbalize things. So we have
we go into lizard brain.
Yeah, that's right. That our reptilian brain takes over, and we don't think straight. So we have our in some circles it's called a safe word, but it's just, I prefer the safe word implies,
or buzzword
or a code word, whatever. But when you use the term safe word, it implies that you're vulnerable, like a child is.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't like to use that term so much.
But it could be something as easy, like at work, we had a safe word that it was avocado.
I know that the girls just came up with all sorts of. They were having fun with that.
Then it became a joke. So.
Yeah, so we had to put it into that one. So what about the other portion of the external boundary is the sexual boundary. So the protective version of it is when someone is approaching me sexually, I have the right to control with whom, when, where, and how I am going to be sexual. And that is particularly important when we're talking with teenagers. Teenagers really need to understand that. And children in general, young children, you don't have to use the word sex, but for example, nobody has the right to touch in those private areas without your permission. Especially as they become, after when the children are able to talk, you can actually verbalize that. And we're going to try to have a child psychologist with us soon that works with children's and parenting to guide us a little bit more on how to have those conversations.
Can I interrupt a second? So I think one of the most important things that I did not grasp as a parent was my child's right to say no. Our first child was so compliant, and that never really, I just thought I was a lucky parent to have such an agreeable child. It kind of bothered me, but I just at the same time was so proud of my child for being so sharing and good when he'd give all of his toys away and then cry when everybody'd leave, or somebody'd ask him for a slice of his pizza and he'd give it away and then cry later because he was still hungry. I just thought my child was super generous. I didn't realize he hadn't had the opportunity to practice saying no, and that those first formative years when that little 2-year-old's learning to say no, so annoying, but it's important because they're practicing on you. Who better to practice on than the people that they know the best? So it's important to encourage that with limits, of course. You don't want tantrums and things of that nature, but you also don't want to squash their ability to say no, and you want to encourage them, give them choices. And that's another topic we'll eventually talk about, giving children choices. But giving them choices empowers them to say no at certain times. So that's very important. And another topic in that area is men, allowing men to say no. We're in this Me Too movement where, I mean, it's great that we women have that power now to say no and people listen, but we also have to listen to men. A couple of years ago, it was actually kind of sad for me. We had an employee who was very boundaryless with that, who felt that she had a right to demand a hug from my husband when she was sad or upset or something of that nature. And you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I actually had to, one of the ways, because a lot of times when people want hugs or want to give hugs and they're denied those hugs, they get offended.
Yeah.
So this was a good employee. She was very productive. So what we decided to do was this is one of the ways that you work and express boundaries in a healthy way, is that we had a boundary workshop.
Yeah.
We just did a boundary workshop with the staff in one of our weekly meetings. Very briefly, we talked about it in terms of having boundaries with clients, especially around men. And that was one of the things that we talked about, is recognizing each other's physical boundaries. And at that point, she actually understood that it wasn't okay to be coming in and demanding those boundaries.
Especially from a man, and in today's climate where men have to be careful about giving hugs, especially in the workplace. And so you had made it very clear from the very beginning to all of our employees at all times that, guys, I love you, but I don't give hugs, But I guess she thought that she was special.
Well, I don't touch my employees, period.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think I said that. That's something you say, we love you, but I never said I love you.
Well, yeah.
Because I'm very careful about that.
That's true.
But I don't touch any of my employees ever. And that is an important boundary that I have in the workplace. And so this is where that became a challenge with this one employee, that we had to make it clear. And without pointing her out or trying to embarrass her, we did it as a group.
Well, I think the compromise was the pinky hug.
Yeah, there was like a pinky swear, pinky hug. That's what happens when men work with women. Anyway, but the rule remains for me is I do not touch my employees. Okay, so we talk, and then the containment boundary is that that boundary that applies to me applies to others. So anybody that I approach sexually, including my wife, by the way, has a right to say no. Now, it's a little bit different with couples. You can't just go into what we call a wall sexually with your spouse, because that's not appropriate either. That's not healthy, I should say. It's not that it's not appropriate, it's that it's not healthy. But we have ways to work around that. But just keep in mind that if one of you is uncomfortable being sexual, then that needs to be worked out, not forced. Okay. So then we're going to move into so that's the physical, which most applies to your body and possessions, belongings, etc. But then there's the internal boundary that addresses pretty much thinking, feelings, and for the most part, behavior, especially when we're talking around verbal issues. So the containment boundaries protects the thinking, feelings, and behavior, and acts like a block or a filter. And that's often this is a difficult concept to grasp. We like to divide it into listening and talking boundaries. So essentially, and believe it or not, the hardest part of the boundary system is listening.
Yeah.
Because we are just when Jennifer would talk to me, I'm just trying to figure out, I'm keeping score, and then I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to formulate my defense rather than just listening to what she's trying to tell me. And one of the ways that we work around that is we practice mirroring each other. That comes from the imago therapy, IMAGO, imago therapy, which essentially means mirror. So we mirror each other so that when she tells me something about how she's feeling, what her internal reality is, so that's her thoughts, emotions, then I've just verbalized them back so that she knows I heard her. I heard her. And Brittany lets herself know when she's uncomfortable.
It's not Brittany, it's Trinity.
What did I say?
Brittany.
Trinity lets herself know when she's uncomfortable. So, okay. So, any comments that you have about that?
Yes. So one of the things that I enjoyed learning, this goes from my background in expressive arts training, and I had taken a person-centered, PC expressive arts training course that lasted a couple of years by Dr. Natalie Rogers. She passed away in 2018, I believe, sadly, but I did have the privilege of training under her. She is the daughter of Dr. Carl Rogers. At any rate, their big thing was learning how to listen actively. Part of the learning to listen to somebody fully is you're getting to know that person. And we tune out of that so much of the time when we're listening to someone, especially if we're ticking off our checklist of building our defense, or if we're thinking about what's my comeback going to be. You're not listening to that person to get to know them. And by listening actively, you're tuning into that person's micro expressions, the color of their skin. Are they flushing? Do they seem nervous? Do they seem sad? What's the underlying message of what they're communicating? It's a really enlightening thing to learn to really listen deeply to your partner or your friend or whoever you're communicating with.
So one of the things about the internal boundary processing is, so if I'm talking to you about what's going on with me, the first thing I got to remind myself is a couple of things. So I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to blame you, because blaming becomes that blaming is a boundary violation. That means that I'm accusing you or I'm blaming you for what's going on with me. So and that's one thing that it dawned on me when Pia was talking to us about the term, the words "make me feel," "you make me feel," is that's an absolute boundary collapse. Those terms and words have meaning. So when we say "make me feel," that means I'm giving you control of how I'm feeling, and that nobody's that powerful. No, nobody has that kind of power. I cannot sit here and go make you feel a certain way. Yeah. That's not how things work. So we're going to talk a little bit more when we talk about reality and emotional reality, etc. But in essence, I have my own thoughts, and my thoughts about what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing is what gives rise to my emotional state. Yeah. So it's feelings, emotions, etc. We'll get into that. But the point being is that when we are talking, we're not trying to control that person. We're not trying to blame. We're not trying to manipulate. Yeah. And we'll give some examples of that. And then we express ourselves. And normally when starting, we try to break it down. We're not going to do that today, but in some future podcasts, we'll do some examples of how we do this.
By using like I statements, like
I statements.
I feel, rather than you make me feel.
Right. That exactly.
Yeah.
So
now you mentioned Pia. Who's Pia?
Pia Melody. Well, we did talk about her on the first chapter, but
not this
on the
one.
first episode, but not this one. You're right. So this is from the work of Pia Melody, and if you're interested in that book, I think it's her best work in terms of written work is. The Intimacy Factor, and I'll put a link on the on the description of the podcast. So this what was I talking about? This is why interrupting is a boundary violation. So this is one of the reasons. So anyway, what was the?
So we were talking about listening boundaries
and
blaming.
Okay, so not to blame. So when I talk, I tell you, this is what's going on with me, and this is how I feel about it. And this is, by using I statements, that's how we not blame each other. If you hear something in the background, that's the dogs. One of them is scratching her back, and then that's why Trinity's all alert all of a sudden. So when I say something, I use I statements. So I'm saying things like, this is what's going on with me, or this is what I noticed, and this is how I feel about it, and this is what I would prefer. Notice that I used all I statements. Yeah. And then when the person listening, it's very important that you're not listening to take blame. You're just listening to take in what the other person is saying. And if you have to mirror that, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Now, in debate circles, that's called steel manning. So steel man somebody's position. So you essentially reflect to them what their position is so that they know they understood you. But we call it, in therapeutic circles, we call it mirroring. So
how do you mirror someone?
So let's say, why don't we go ahead and do that? Tell me something. Give me a toothpaste issue real quick, maybe surrounding Trinity's behavior right now.
Trinity, some of you may have noticed, she only has 3 legs. She's been through a lot in her little short life. She was used as a bait dog in pit bull fights. That's where we rescued her from. But because of that, she has some PTSD, and she licks herself a lot. So we try to set some boundaries around that. You'll see her, she'll lick you if you just stick your hand in her face. So I say, no licking, no licking. And she looks at me like, I don't know about that, right? So that's where I'm setting a boundary with her.
Okay, but we're talking about mirroring.
Okay, so I'm telling you my story. Are you going to mirror it to me?
Okay, well, that was kind of a neutral story. I guess that works.
Yeah.
So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is that when Trinity starts licking you, you don't like that, and then you've taught Trinity not to lick you by telling her to stop licking. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the mirroring process. It wasn't exactly a boundary practice, but it works fine.
You caught me on the spot there.
That's fine. That actually, that works. Yeah. That's the concept of mirroring.
Yeah.
Because I also got,
thinking.
I think I caught the what's going on, what's happening, your emotions around that. You don't like it. And then your activity or your solution was to train her not to do that or to minimize that. Yeah. So that's...
Well, it's just not good for her to lick herself raw and everyone else.
Yeah, that's one of the other reasons why she gets, she's dressed up. So she licks herself less that way. Okay. So now when you listen, we talked about reminding yourself not to take blame. You're not trying to keep score. I mentioned those. And this is the hard part. When the person is talking to you in terms of those boundaries, and you're working with boundaries, okay, they're telling you what's going on with them. It may involve you, or it may involve me in this situation. So I have to be careful not to get caught up in whatever's going on with the other person, in this case, my wife. So here's what I have to be. I have to be listening to what she's saying, and couple of things. I ask myself, is this true for me? So is the thing true, not true, or neutral? You don't have opinions about it. So if it is not true, then that's information about her. That's information about my wife in this situation. So if she starts accusing me of something I didn't do, that's easy. Well, I had nothing to do with that, but I'm not going to say anything until she's done expressing herself. If it is true for me, here's the hard part, then I have to allow myself to process that and have feelings about it. We'll talk about feelings and emotions at a later date. So for the moment, why don't we just use one example so that we can, we're going to use the same example. We're going to go through what the listener is supposed to be doing, at least conceptually. So the first one, I am going to assume that what she's telling me is true. Okay, this is pretty simple. So go ahead, just tell me something, anything.
So, honey, I've noticed that I believe it is you that keeps leaving the light on outside on the parking lot. And for a number of reasons, I would prefer that that is turned off before we go to bed.
Okay. So first thing she said is, I believe that it's you. Probably a better way to say it is that the lights are on.
Yeah, I'm noticing
the lights are on, and just leave it at that. Not go into I believe it's you.
Yeah, because you're right. Because when I say you, that's an accusation. Whereas I've been noticing the lights have been left on, and on the parking, the driveway, and I would prefer that the lights are turned off at night.
So this is also this is not part of the reason we're saying this, because it's not about getting caught up in who actually is leaving the lights on, because that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
The point is that we want those lights out, and then I want that as well. So if we start getting into a tit for tat as to who really left those lights on, and then that starts a fight, and a lot of couples get caught up in that.
And it's a distraction from what I really want.
What the real issue is the lights are on outside. And I don't know how many times we've gone through this with other couples, and that's exactly what happens. Once we resolve that one issue, then all of a sudden they start being able to process they're able to manage their issues a little bit better. Usually the ones that are not as emotionally charged. So when you said that the lights are on outside, I have the same perception. So that is true for me.
Okay.
And let's find out. Let's maybe talk to our kids and see if they're leaving them on, and maybe we can.
Okay.
Take the opportunity to.
Because my initial thought was it was you, but since I didn't blame you, then you.
Yeah,
we
then maybe
problem solved together.
It might be right. You get into problem solving phase. You skip the fighting and get into the problem solving. So let's say it's not true. So you go ahead and say, "I notice the lights are on." Go ahead. Tell me the same thing.
So I noticed the lights are on every night, or almost every night when I'm about to turn into bed on the driveway, and it's my preference that those lights go out.
Okay, so let's say what I'm actually doing is that I'm actually, after she's gone to bed, I'm going around and making sure all the lights are out. So by the time she's gone to bed, I've turned the lights out, and she doesn't notice that. So when you say that, then I say, okay, well, I have a different perception. Would you like to hear it? And normally we start with I have a different perception when we're working with couples. We are at a point that we probably say, well, actually, I go around after you've gone to bed and I turn them off. Would you prefer that I turn them off earlier?
Well, so is it not you then that's leaving the lights on?
I don't know who's leaving them on.
Ah, okay. I think that maybe we should teach whoever's leaving them on to turn them off.
Okay.
That would be my preference.
Okay, but I see. Okay.
Rather than you enabling whoever is leaving the lights on.
Okay. So let's have a quick family meeting with the kids and make sure that we alternate having the responsibility to turn the lights on every night. And that usually solves that problem.
Okay.
So each day of the week, and then we know who did not follow up on making sure the lights are off.
Good idea. Yeah, because they never admit it, do they?
No, the kids they're never responsible for whatever is going on,
Brilliant
right?
idea, yes.
That's what I thought. Okay, so then so that's true, not true. And then there's another one, which is questionable. So you go ahead and tell me about the light.
So, dear, I have noticed that each night the light is left on the driveway, and it's my preference that it goes out each night.
Okay, so now here, let's go back to the questionable, because let's say I'm still going around after everybody's gone to bed, and I'm trying to understand what she's talking about. So so I'm confused. Can you just give me a little bit more information? At what time are you noticing the lights still on?
Well, I'm usually the last one to go to bed, or if Mario is up studying, he may be the last one, but typically it's me. And so maybe around 11, 12 o'clock at night.
Okay, so I propose a couple of things. We can have a family meeting and make one person responsible, or I can, before I go to bed, I can verify that the lights are off. Okay. So do either one of those work for you?
I would prefer the family meeting because the person who's leaving them on needs to learn to turn them off. Okay.
Why don't we do a very dysfunctional version of this?
Okay.
Because this is something that I would have been doing. I would have been beating myself up about. You didn't mention anything about your feelings, but I think that's going to be later on. When we talk about emotional reality, we might want to address that a little bit. So let's say this is what probably would have happened before we started therapy. I would have come up to you as, okay, you left the lights on again last night. I keep telling you to turn them off because I'm tired of paying the bills.
That's not me. You keep accusing me, but it's not me.
Well, it's not me, so who is it?
Mario says it's not him, and
okay,
Diego
so
says
if this sounds familiar, you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So
there's so much there to unpack now. Now we have to start with, well, my feelings are hurt because you accused me, and you're frustrated because you think that I'm not owning up, and
I know I'm right.
You know you're right, and then there's that thought in the back of your head, it must be one of the kids, but they're never going to admit it, so you're just angry.
And I just keep paying the bills.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things about relationships, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Yeah.
I wanna amend that to you. Do you want to be right or you want to solve the problem?
Yeah, I'd want to solve the problem.
Right, I'd rather solve the problem. Maybe.
Now, if you're at such a dysfunctional point in your relationship that you just want to be right, you probably need help. You probably
need you got to work to do.
Because there is that I think in the beginning of our recovery, I want to be right.
Well, you mentioned at the very beginning.
At times I felt so disempowered. You felt disempowered. So we wanted to have a win. But now that we've been right so many times because we've problem solved together, that's dissipated. It's like we just want to get to the problem. We don't like this fighting anymore.
No, the fighting's not fun.
Who cares who wins?
Well, who cares? Yeah, who cares who wins? Who cares who's right?
Yeah.
But you mentioned at the very beginning is that you were going to go to the therapist office and tell me what for.
Yeah.
Because you knew what boundaries were.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was going to back me up.
And I think we were both very surprised by how dysfunctional we were. And it's still, even after that, it took us a while to get back into the rhythm of things. We mentioned in the initial episode how we had a number of people just asking us, when are you going to write a book? And that's not about bragging here, is that we worked together so well that we were able to become an example for other couples. And that's what we're trying to do here, is so that we can show other couples how it's done, and how we want to, how it is possible to do it and get to a next level.
Well, not only that, but we came from some pretty crazy backgrounds.
Do you want to talk about that? This is sort of dovetails. This is not, it's a tangent, I should say. It's not exactly about boundaries, but you told me one time that based on that personality inventory you did, that we're not supposed to be compatible at all.
Yeah, that was the Enneagram.
Can you spell it?
Gosh, I was never good at the spelling bees.
But Enneagram, like
Enneagram. It starts with an E. You want to look it up while I'm talking about it? Okay.
We'll make a link. We'll make a link.
Yeah, but I think it's EN something or another. But it's the Enneagram. It's an old system of personality traits, and in the Enneagram, you're assigned a number around a wheel. So it starts with 1, and it goes all the way around to, I think, 9 is the last one. You tend to be an 8, which is very directive, very, kind of bossy.
Yeah, Trinity did not like that.
And you very logical. You make decisions very easily. What are some other?
I don't remember because you're the one that told me about it.
It's very much a leadership kind of position. You find a lot of bosses and things like that. They tend to be an 8 on the Enneagram. Well, I was a 4, and a 4 is more of that artistic soul, that kind of a hippie, the free spirit. And so imagine, like, we're almost complete opposites on the wheel. Actually, we are opposites. So that free spirit, open-mindedness, kind of person that can kind of be emotional and brooding at sometimes, and then you've got that kind of everything is logical and orderly and precise, and you put those two people together. This was one. It was kind of interesting how, in this group study we were going through all the different partnerships, and there was always a good side to most of them, well, to all of them. This was the one where it said, this one, we want to put a warning. This could be a very violent relationship, like very volatile.
Volatile, yeah.
Volatile. That this is not a good pairing in most cases. And it just went down this long list of all these, negative things about this couple together. It did say, though, that if this couple is able to, is healthy enough emotionally and mentally to where they can work on their differences, it can become a very spiritual relationship. Yeah. So I
don't remember you telling me that.
Well,
maybe you did. I don't remember.
So there's
anyway.
3 different levels. There's a very, very healthy, which, only a small percentage of people fit into that. Then you've got the average, what most people fall into, and most people haven't had extensive therapy, and then there's the people that are even below that. And I would say we started out below that. So yes, we were at each other. We weren't physically violent, but we were insulting. We were constantly arguing, but it seemed like we rarely agreed. We loved each other dearly, but there was so much we didn't agree on. And we just saw the world through completely different lenses. And then eventually, as we started recovering, then we got to that norm, and we got a little taste of that spiritual relationship, and it was enough to just keep driving us for more. So as we continued our recovery, it has come to that beautiful partnership where, we were really opposites, and opposites do attract. I mean, that's kind of cliche, but when you can get those opposites to agree and to dovetail into each other and to become true partners, oh my gosh, there's so much healing, because we had to heal all of those wounds that made us such extremists.
And I think once we get into the spirituality, we start talking about spirituality within the relationship, I think that'll become a little bit more obvious. But that's essentially what you're saying, is part of the spiritual aspect of a relationship is the growth that comes with it. And I oftentimes hear people asking, are you happily married? And I don't necessarily ask me that directly, but my response is often when I hear that is, if you think marriage is about happiness, you're going to be disappointed, because life is not about happiness. Life is hard. There's a lot of struggles. So marriage is about managing those struggles together, and it's about growth. Mm-hmm. Happiness is a bonus.
Yeah.
Happiness is just a bonus that comes with it. Everything else needs to be a form of growth in all aspects of your life, and that's what the spiritual part of it is, that we'll talk about a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about evaluating the boundaries. So when you sit down and you evaluate what your boundaries are, you have either no boundaries, which is boundaryless.
Mm-hmm.
You're walled off, which means that you don't let anybody else in. Or you're functional, in which those boundaries are dynamic. You used the term picket fence at one point. I think the biological term of a cell membrane, where selectively allow some things in, some not.
Permeable.
Well, that would be semi-permeable, and that's what they teach in high school biology. But it's really more selectively permeable, where some things are allowed through, some things are not, some things are definitely not. And I think that's more the way I see it. But that's, of course, it's from a biology background. But the picket fence makes sense to you. The cell membrane makes more sense to me.
Then just to explain that here in this episode, the picket fence is a metaphor for using boundaries. And so, there's different people sometimes think boundaries are like when I
want to bring your mic
when I first thought of boundaries more like walls, where you build up this brick wall to protect yourself from everything on the outside. Well, the sad thing is when you protect yourself from everything, you're also keeping out everything that's good. So the idea is to have something that, like a picket fence, that defines that, okay, this is my yard, and that over there is your yard. And so my dog shouldn't go into your yard, or my children shouldn't go into your yard and play. And by the same token, you should ask for permission to come into my yard. But yet I can talk to you over the picket fence and have a conversation. But then when I'm ready to go back into my yard or into my house and have some privacy, I have that boundary there, if that makes sense. That's a good metaphor for healthy boundaries.
Thank you, dear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about boundary evaluation. So the external physical boundary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So protecting oneself. So this is the protective boundary. So essentially I'm protecting myself from others. So the person that has no boundaries, that person has trouble stopping others from standing in his face or her face, touching or getting in private property. So you have trouble stopping others from doing that, right? The person with walls often does not let others touch him or his private property. So that's walled off. So those are the two extremes, right? And the functional person lets others know how close they can stand. So that's why I was saying when we started this, we figured out what your physical boundary is, what your personal space was with me, because it's going to vary depending on the person.
And culture.
Although I do have issues with the culture part, but we'll deal with that at a later date. So your personal space with me is very, very, it's almost non-existent. With me is a little bit more, I do need to have a little bit more personal space. And then, does that bother you?
It did when we were first dating. I couldn't understand it because we hadn't been through recovery. So I couldn't understand why you wouldn't just let me cuddle you all the time. I thought you were being mean.
Exactly. And that's interpretation, is that dysfunctional people they accuse or blame other people for being mean. So that goes into that.
Not supplying my need.
Exactly. Okay, so sticking to the physical boundary, containing yourself, containing oneself. I often stand in others' faces, I touch them, and their private things without permission. So we've all met that person that stands in your face and they can't get away from, it's like, dude, give me some space here. The person with walls, they rarely approach other people for physical contact. So especially in an intimate relationship, that's problematic. Okay. The functional person is respectful of others' private space and does not touch their personal property or their possessions without permission, right? So there was one thing when we were first married. And after we had our first child, that's when we actually had 2 cars. And I blamed you for this, even though you were not doing it consciously. You would keep your keys, your car keys in your purse, and I would leave my car keys on the countertop in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And you were always grabbing my keys and taking them with you. You don't remember that?
No.
And you would leave with your car, and then I would stuck in the house, and I couldn't leave, and I had to go to work. And I would always get so angry.
I kind of.
You kind of remember that?
Yeah.
So I would, and then it was one day, and this is before recovery, I figured, okay, it seems like I have no control. I can't get her to understand not to take my keys. Mm-hmm. So instead of putting my keys on the countertop, I put it in my bedside drawer. On my nightstand drawer, and that stopped. Yeah, because you stopped looking for your keys where my keys are, and then that changed that. So that was a intuitive way of my setting boundaries with you in that regard. But it just came to mind about possessions. Yeah. She's getting restless. Okay, let's talk about the external sexual boundary. Okay, excuses. We had to take a break because Trinity had to go to the bathroom, so we had to let her outside. Now she's just roaming around, so you might hear squealing. Anyway, going back to the sexual boundary evaluation. So, protective. So the person without proper boundaries, when being approached sexually, often has trouble setting limits. So let me just expand a little bit on that. It's not just saying no, but engaging in sexual practices that one might feel uncomfortable with. Okay, so that, I don't think we ever had much issue with that ourselves, but we encounter other couples that do, or that have. The person with walls rarely responds to the other person's sexual approach. So if you're having issues there within your marriage, one of you is what we refer to as sexually anorexic. Sexual anorexia. If you're interested in learning more about that, there's a great book by Patrick Carnes, Carnes, Sexual Anorexia, which addresses this. And I actually went through a period of that, and we had to work through that as well. And
it's funny. I think I went through that too. I think people go through different. It's like when one goes through anorexia, the other one is more needy, and it's interesting how that dynamic works.
Yeah. So the functional person determines who, when, where, and how she will be sexual when others are approaching them. Okay? That includes which types of sexual practices as well. Mm-hmm. The containment boundary. The person that doesn't have a good containment boundary often engages with others sexually without their permission and has trouble containing his sexual energy. So that doesn't just mean violent behavior, but for example, exposing other individuals to sexual information that they're not willing to experience. So voyeurism would fall into that category. But exhibitionism would be one extreme form. Mm-hmm. Not the most extreme form, you know. Yeah. We're trying to avoid certain words in this podcast.
An example of that, I remember in my early 20s, I had a boss that used to make me go and, Jennifer, go get this file on such and such. And I'm like, oh, there we go again. And he was like really tall, 6'5" or whatever. And he'd use that as an excuse to try to
look down your shirt.
So that's voyeurism. And of course, I'd try to hold his heart. You know, I was so young. Back then, in the present day, you could file a complaint, but this was the early.
If you mention you're so young, that's what it's important to teach your children boundaries. Yeah, because they inherit our boundary system.
I felt like I didn't have the right to say no. He was my boss. He was much older than me. Exactly. So, yeah, if I had seen proper boundaries modeled, then I would know how to stand back, or I'm busy right now or whatever.
Something. You find a way to say it in a healthy manner.
Yeah.
Okay, so the walls is rarely approaches others sexually or releases sexual energy. So essentially, for example, for a woman would be, I don't want to say dress provocatively, but dress in a way that essentially other people would be, I got to be careful how I say this. So maybe you're the one that needs to say it.
So it shouldn't matter what a woman wears. When a woman says no or does not invite.
No, that's not what I mean. It's when you're not giving off sexual energy. In other words, you don't want to necessarily dress provocatively when you're interested in someone, but you want to dress in an alluring way, right? If you're interested in somebody.
I don't know what you mean by alluring. So
you rarely approach others or you release sexual energy. So how would a woman release sexual energy in someone they might be interested in?
Inappropriately or
no, in a healthy
appropriately, way. A smile, a tilt of the head, but you also have to be
okay.
It
so
has
that's
to be in context.
Right. But that's the point. That's the point. That what this says is when you're talking about walls, that you rarely release that sexual energy.
Okay. So, let's say that I'm interested in a guy, but every time he comes in, I turn my back or I walk out of the room or I say something. And this happens, by the way. It was funny how, as these girls in elementary school would be so rude and steal things from our son and then find out later they had a crush on him. So, it's just by giving off, offensive signals even, that's a wall. Because and people do it unconsciously because they're so afraid that person's going to find out that I like them. So they'll do something, they'll make a rude joke or pick on them or something of that nature. That's a wall.
So the functional, we kind of alluded to the functional individual does not engage people sexually without their permission, can contain or release their sexual energy as it is appropriate. So that's what I was getting at. For men, it's different. Men can express their sexual energy by asking a woman out.
Exactly. So if a man is interested, unlike those movies from the 1950s where a man sweeps the woman off her feet and smacks a kiss on her. That used to make me so cringe, even though I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and it just irritate the heck out of me when was it Humphrey Bogart?
I just noticed how you used all victim statements there. It made me so cringe. It irritated me.
You're right.
Those were all victim statements.
I'm going back to a childhood memory.
Right.
So I felt that just inappropriateness when I would see that. But being a child and having a child's voice, I didn't know how to express that. I felt like that was inappropriate. It was the culture at the time. But now as an adult, I see what was wrong with that, they weren't asking the woman, hey, and I've been in those situations where, when I was young and single, where a man just thought, if I just keep persisting, and it's like, I don't know how to explain to you, but you're a stalker. You're not going to win me over. So, so the appropriate thing to do is, if you are interested in another person, ask them, on a date, or ask them, if you're on a date, can I hold your hand? Can I put my arm around you? And some people are like, oh, but that sounds so awkward. It really doesn't, in the right. Especially I think from a female's point of view, where we're used to just somebody just putting their arm around us and not asking, it's empowering. It really is, from my point of view, and I think from most females' point of view, it's empowering when somebody asks, do you mind if I kiss you? And if you do it in the right kind of tone of voice, it can actually be very romantic.
Well, we still have a lot to cover.
Yes.
So let's move on. So the talking boundaries, for example, when a person has no internal boundaries, they often reactive to others' thoughts, emotions, and usually takes blame. So that's a key thing, is being reactive and taking blame. The person with walls,
the dogs are playing.
I know, rarely listens to what is important to others. That's a person with walls. And the person who's functional sorts through what others are saying and feeling, only takes in what has and has feelings about the truth. Okay, about the truth as he knows it. In other words, as I see it. So you tell me how you feel, what you're thinking, etc. And that's the example that we gave, that I take in what I consider true for me, and what is not true. That's information about you, right? And then no boundaries talking often says whatever comes to mind and does not contain emotions, often gives blame. So I'm blaming you for what's going on with me. So that irritates me. That's a lack of containment boundary. Or it makes me feel cringe. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
It makes me cringe. That's the boundaryless statement.
So tell me your favorite phrase whenever there's something that I've done that is somehow causing you to feel irritated or anxiety, or what is your favorite phrase?
Well, actually, when I do that, we had to talk about this because it had to be something that also didn't sound accusatory towards you.
Yeah.
So when you're leaving, let's say you're leaving things on my side of the sink, about that I feel frustration that it's my side of the sink that's always getting dirty from your makeup.
No, but you have a phrase that you'll
I whack myself out.
Yes.
I'm whacking myself out.
I'm whacking myself out about this.
Right. So I'm beating myself up over it.
And that often now, because of all the, we don't have to do that whole long dialogue anymore. It's kind of like you'll just walk in from work and, honey, I'm whacking myself out about those boxes that are in the garage, and I'm, oh, yeah, I forgot. I need to throw those. So,
or I'm whacking myself out about the fact that you're parking in the middle of the parking garage and I can't get my car in.
Yeah, that was Lori. I'm blaming.
Okay, we'll come back to that. We're going to have to dialogue that one. And then talking walls often does not tell others what is important to him or her. Just withdrawing, that's a wall. I'm not talking about what's important.
And that's also, isn't that like expecting the other person to read your mind?
That's part of it. Yeah. If you're expecting others to read your mind, you got problems. That's a wall.
Yeah.
And then you're blaming the other person for not reading your mind.
Yeah. Like we've been married 27 years. He should know what my favorite color is by now.
I know. We heard that so much. So the functional person talks clearly, but in a politic, or I hate that word. I hate the word politic, but in a diplomatic manner, and releases their emotions with moderation. In other words, you express, kind of like I just did, is I'm whacking myself out over the fact that your makeup is on my side of the sink. And that's a repeating phenomenon. Okay, let's wrap up with what are boundary violations. Let's give a list of boundary violations, because that's when I was going through the boundary work, that's one thing that clarified things for me, is that list of boundary violations. And by the way, this is not complete or not extensive. There's others, but these are really helpful. So this is mostly the internal boundaries, because we talked about the physical boundaries, standing in each other's space, taking people's property. That's a little bit easy. But, for example, by word or deed, indicate that another person is worth less. So in recovery, we say going one up or one down. So if I go one up on you, that means you're worth less than I am. And if I'm going one down, which is the victim position, then I'm devaluing myself. I don't have the right to tell you no. You mentioned that in one of your little incidents. Yelling or screaming. That's actually overlaps, in my opinion, with physical boundary, because the sound is a physical phenomenon. So yelling at somebody, screaming, that is a boundary violation, both physical and internal. Ridiculing or making fun of somebody else, especially in public, because that degrades them. That is a boundary violation. Lying. lying. We're going to talk about it when we talk about spiritual.
By omission or by word?
Yes, all of the above. So just a comment about the omission part, because I remember that you went into the hospital or a clinic. You were going to get some kind of procedure done, and one of the other patients asked the nurse, "Is that Dr. Pokerell's wife?" And she said yes. Mm-hmm. And that was actually against HIPAA. That they're not supposed to be doing that. And I
didn't know that.
We confronted the nurse about it, mm-hmm. and she says, "Well, I didn't want to lie." Okay, well, here's the way you say that, because there's two things. You lie
for my privacy.
If you don't say anything, it's a lie by omission. If you say something, it's a boundary violation. So how do you handle that? Well, you say, "I'm not at liberty to discuss that."
Yeah. That's setting a boundary.
That's setting a boundary. I'm not at liberty for discuss. It's not a lie.
It's not your business.
Well,
that's what I would have said.
Yes, I know, but in a healthy way. Yeah. We would say, "I'm not at liberty to discuss that." Now, if they insist, mm-hmm. then you can say it's really none of your business. Yeah. If you don't understand that. Mm-hmm. So that is usually people, when you say "I'm not at liberty to discuss that," most people will just pull back. But there are some that are pushy and will push that boundary. Yeah. Breaking a commitment for no reason. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. Yeah. So many people no show or cancel last minute, make up excuses. That's
getting really rampant these days. I don't know what it is, but it
happens a lot. And I think it is a sign of immaturity to mm-hmm. not keep a commitment when, I mean, if you have a good reason, you were in an accident.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a good reason.
Like not showing up to your hairdresser or saying you're RSVPing to a birthday party and you no show.
We have a policy that, there's a fee that we charge if somebody no shows.
I mean, it's sad, but that's why you see so many people. Even now, you go to the spa and the spa wants to charge you because it's becoming such
the hair salon, or they require a deposit or something like that for those reasons.
A cultural thing.
Yeah, and I hear that from a lot of businesses that's a problem.
It used to be a non-existent 20 years ago.
I don't know. Something's happened. But the point is that is a boundary violation, and most people are okay with it, but there's some people that get offended by that, and that's
people that get paid for that. That's how they feed their family.
Special and commission, right?
Yeah, they feed their family, make their car payment.
Anyway, the point being is that is a boundary violation to not show up, and when there's a consequence, then there's no reason to get upset when there's a legitimate consequence.
Yeah.
Attempting to control or manipulate another person. So if I'm telling you what to do, mm-hmm. rather than asking you, please, can you keep your makeup on your side of the room, mm-hmm. or of the sink? Or is there something we can do to help you keep that over there so it doesn't mess up my side of the sink?
Or being Machiavellian or...
manipulative.
Or triangulation. Is that in there?
That's part of manipulation, but that's a little advanced that we'll have to talk about another date. Being sarcastic while being intimate. Mm-hmm. So there's banter. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Banter is fine. Mm-hmm. But when you're trying to be intimate, sarcasm refers, the root word is sark, which is flesh, mm-hmm. and asm, which is split apart. So essentially tearing away at the flesh is what sarcasm means. So when you're trying to be intimate, you're trying to have a relationship with somebody, that's a sure way to tear that relationship apart, literally.
And the sad thing is on that, I've heard people say that, oh, well, we fell for each other because we have that same sarcastic sense of humor. I've heard that a lot. Why do people feel that that's a reason to bond with someone?
Well, I think part of the issue is that humor, because they're using humor to disarm, and that's disarming. What they're not realizing is that the strike that comes in from the sarcasm gets through because we're disarmed. Yeah. And that, I mean, I think there are some couples that get away with that. I'm not sure what their relationship is behind closed doors, but from what we've seen with those sarcastic, when you're trying to be intimate and you're trying to have a serious conversation, and that person is behaving like Dumb and Dumber, then that's, it's a problem. You can't have a serious conversation. Yeah. I know that I had a patient with severe dementia that every word out of his mouth was a joke. Like I would say, "How are you feeling?" He would say, "With my fingers." And I would try to say, "No, but I really need to know how you're feeling. Are you hurting?" And then he'd go into another joke, and finally, I finally had to ask him to bring a family member, because I think that was part of the dementia why he was behaving that way. But you see my point is that you can't have a serious conversation when somebody's constantly making jokes or making those inappropriate remarks too. So sarcasm during intimacy, or trying to have, in this sense, when I'm saying intimacy, I do mean trying to be serious. It's not helpful.
Yeah. That is a wall, actually.
It is a wall. Interrupting. So when somebody's trying to talk and they constantly getting interrupted. Yeah.
That's a masculine trait.
Interrupting?
Yeah. It's an alpha trait. Okay.
It's a Jennifer trait.
Yes, I know.
And then lastly, blaming.
Yes.
So blaming others for what's going on with you is a major boundary violation. And that is, so we'll let Trinity get comfortable there.
Yes.
Make a mess. Okay. All right. So blaming others for what's going on with us, that is a big one, and we'll be coming back to blame in other episodes. Did she just try to lick your face?
Yes.
Yeah, the dog has no physical boundaries.
I know.
So
she's learning them now.
yeah, good luck with that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Please don't forget to like and share. And as Jennifer said, if you have a friend without boundaries, that'd be perfect episode for them. Hopefully they learned something. But listen to it together, because it works better that way. And our next topic is going to be what? Self-care?
The next topic that we have is, yes, self-care. Self-care, and then after that, family of origin, and then emotional reality. Those are our next three topics.
Okay. I think we had talked about that. Family of origin is too soon for that. We have to talk about emotional reality first.
We'll talk more about it later.
We'll dialogue that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, have a good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.